On Sunday, we continued our sermon series, Parker Goes to the Movies, with Pixar's Coco. Now, this movie is a fantastic watch, and if you have not seen it yet, I would encourage you to watch it. It is full of vibrant colors and music. It is about a little boy who is with his family, but also is celebrating the Day of the Dead. And so he is understanding what that means, and it helps teach us a little cultural aspect of the Day of the Dead. But it's also a story that is rich in meaning. And one of the key pieces that sticks with you if you watch this movie is from this song that you hear over and over again, Remember Me. It's a song that is sung so that somebody can be remembered after they are gone. Whether it is because they have transitioned to the next life, or whether it's because they are away on a trip and won't be back for a while. Remember Me is this song that helps us to remember. Remember where we've come from. Remember our family. Remember the lessons that they have taught us that will carry us into the future. So if you're like most people, you have a problem with forgetting. I know I forget all the time. If I didn't have a slip of paper, a Post-it note, my phone with me, I would forget everything. I'm constantly walking around, writing things down, trying not to lose those papers because that is how I am remembering things these days. Well, they recently did a study and they came to find out that people often forget things. Like, have you ever met somebody new and as soon as they told you their name, you forgot it completely? I know I'm guilty of that. Well, when they did this study, they found that 80% of people forget names and forget them pretty quickly. Are you one of those 80%? Or maybe you are somebody who has forgotten where they placed something. You know, you have something really important and you set it down and you're not going to forget where it is because you have it in this certain place, but then when you need it, you can't find it. 60% of people admit to have forgotten where they have placed something. Or how about this? You have walked into a room and you have forgotten why you walked into that room. And so you stand there for a minute and you try to figure it out, and maybe you backtrack for a minute, hoping that it comes to you. 38% admit to that. Now, I'm pretty sure that those numbers are higher and that other people have just forgotten that that has happened to them. Forgetting is a normal thing in our lives. It's part of our condition. Sometimes it's because we're too busy. Sometimes it's because we're not paying attention. Sometimes it is not our fault. Things just kind of float out. When we look at the scriptures, we see a lot of times where people forget, where God does amazing things before them, and yet people forget. And we often wonder, how could they forget that? How could they forget that God was faithful? How could they forget that God had done this monstrous thing before them? We often think about the Israelites the most when we reflect on people who've forgotten, right? These Israelites who are rescued from slavery, who are there on the banks of the Red Sea when the river or when the sea parts and they walk through on dry land. And then those waves crash back down and the sea fills back up. And it's almost in that moment that people forget that God has been faithful. It's just a little bit while later when they're out in the desert grumbling and complaining and wanting to go back because they have forgotten what God has done for them. How could they forget? So they wander in the desert for all of these years, and finally, Joshua brings the new generation up to the promised land. And again, the Jordan River parts as they walk through. But this time, God tells them to grab 12 stones, to take 12 stones from the middle of this river, and as they cross, to put them on the other side, to make a tower of stones so they do not forget, so that they remember that God was faithful. so they can tell their children the stories of the ways in which God parted seas for them and God led them to places that were promised to them, remembering that God is faithful. Now, when I think about this tower of 12 stones, I can't help but think about a lot of my walks and hikes out in nature. You know, when you're walking on a trail, sometimes it's a really clear-cut trail and you know exactly the path that you need to go. But there's other times when you're walking on a trail and all of a sudden it just disappears in front of you. You have this moment of panic, of trying to figure out, where is the trail? How do I get to my next location? How do I not get lost in this place that I don't know? And it's in these moments that you begin to look for these towers of rocks. They call them cairns. Cairns that guide your path. And when you see this tower of rocks, you know that that is the way to walk. It's a way to remember the trail. It's a way to point you in the right direction. It's a way to remind you that you're not alone and that you will be able to get to your final destination. What are the towers of stone in your faith that help guide you? What are the cairns that help mark your trail, that help remind you that God has been faithful, to remember God in the ways in which you have never been alone? I know for me, I always wear this necklace. Most of you have probably seen me wear it. It rarely comes off. It's a way in which I remember. My mom and dad brought this home from Israel when they went to visit. They brought me home one, they brought my sister home one, and they brought my mom home one. So all three of us wear these necklaces. And so it reminds me that I'm connected into this family, that I'm loved unconditionally within my family, that they are always with me. But there's also a deeper meaning to this necklace as well. You see, it's a widow's mite. And so it reminds me of God's walk with me, that I'm never alone, and that all I have to do is give what I have to give, no more, no less, and God will bless it. What are those things that help you remember? Is it a journal? A place that you have written down how God has been faithful to you? Is it maybe an artifact or something that your loved one loved or carried around with them? And so when you see that, you remember their stories, you remember their love, you remember the ways in which they shared with you light and love that now carries you throughout your journey. What are the ways in which you remember? This is one of those wonderful stories to sit with, to think about those who we love, who have created us and made us into who we are, the people who have poured out love and grace into our lives, people like grandparents, aunts and uncles, teachers, friends, those who are still with us and those who we have lost. What are the ways in which we can remember them and honor their lives? To not let their lives just disappear, but to keep bringing up their stories, bringing up their names, bringing up those lessons that they taught us that then can carry on, continue to guide us, and maybe be able to guide our children, to remind them that they are not alone, that family is always with them, that they are unconditionally loved by God, and that God is always faithful. What are the stories that we need to remember to hold on to that as well? I hope and pray that you will take some time to reflect, to sit with the ways in which God has been faithful to you, to grab a stone and to hold on to it, to remember, to place it somewhere where you will see it and you won't forget. Because God never forgets you. God is with you always. And those lessons from our loved ones, our family, our friends who have helped guide our path, They are lessons that are there for us always. Their love continuing on in the great love that God gives to us. Remember me.